The noose creaked like a dying animal in the desert wind. 5 rough ropes swaying beneath the crooked oak at the edge of Red Hollow, where the dust never settled, and Mercy had been buried long before the first bullet ever flew. And beneath those ropes stood 5 Apache girls, wrists bound, feet barely touching the dry earth, their faces bruised, lips split, eyes burning not with fear but with a quiet, defiant pain that cut deeper than any blade. And the town watched in silence, men with rifles resting against their shoulders, women clutching shawls while turning their faces away, children pulled back indoors, because in Red Hollow, justice was whatever the loudest gun decided it was. And today the loudest gun belonged to Sheriff Clay Morton, a man whose badge had rusted along with his soul, who claimed these girls were spies, thieves, witches, anything that made killing them easier to swallow, though their real crime was being Apache in a land stolen by lies. And as the sheriff read his sentence with a voice practiced in cruelty, the oldest girl lifted her chin, blood streaking her cheek, and whispered something in her language, perhaps a prayer, perhaps a curse, while the youngest trembled but did not cry, because tears had already been beaten out of her days ago. And just as Morton raised his hand to signal the drop, a sound rolled in from the west, low and steady, the unmistakable rhythm of hooves not running but approaching with purpose, and heads turned slowly, irritation first, then unease, as a lone rancher emerged through the dust, tall in the saddle, hat pulled low, coat weathered by years of sun and sorrow, a man no one remembered seeing in town, yet everyone somehow knew did not belong to their fear. And he stopped his horse not 10 paces from the gallows, eyes lifting to the girls, then to the ropes, then finally locking onto the sheriff with a gaze so cold it made the desert feel small. And when he spoke, his voice was calm, almost gentle, but it carried like thunder across the square as he said, "Cut them down," and laughter burst from Morton's deputies, until the rancher shifted slightly in his saddle, revealing the rifle across his back, its worn stock carved with Apache markings older than the town itself. And the laughter died, replaced by a silence thick enough to choke on, and Morton sneered, demanding to know who he was. And the rancher replied simply, "The last man you should have hoped wouldn't ride in today." And in that moment, something changed in the air, something ancient and final. Because this was no drifter looking for trouble. This was a man who had buried too much, lost too much, and come to collect a debt written in blood. And as the wind tugged the ropes tighter around the girls' necks, the rancher's hand rested near his holster, steady as a gravestone, and the town of Red Hollow stood unknowingly at the edge of its own judgment, while the narrator's voice reminds the viewer that evil often looks confident right up, until the moment it meets someone who refuses to kneel. And if this story already grips your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because legends like this are not just told, they are remembered. The first gunshot did not come from the gallows but from the rancher's rifle, splitting the rope above the youngest girl's head with impossible precision, the fibers snapping like a scream cut short, and before her feet even hit the dirt. The second and third ropes fell, then the fourth, then the fifth, each shot timed like the ticking of a final clock, and chaos erupted as deputies fired wildly, bullets chewing through wood and air, while the rancher moved like a man already dead to fear, sliding from the saddle, dragging the girls behind the wagon, covering them with his body as he returned fire with controlled fury, every shot finding a mark, every movement deliberate. Because this wasn't rage, it was resolve. And when the smoke settled, half the deputies lay wounded or fleeing, and Sheriff Morton stood alone, revolver shaking, screaming about the law until the rancher walked toward him, boots crunching on dust and broken pride, and said quietly, "You lost the right to that word," before knocking the gun from Morton's hand and forcing him to his knees beneath the same oak tree. And the townsfolk watched as the rancher untied the remaining rope and looped it around the sheriff's wrists, not hanging him, not killing him, but binding him there for the arriving federal marshal, whose papers the rancher finally produced, proof of illegal executions, stolen land, murdered tribes, all signed by Morton's own hand. And as the girls were lifted onto the horse and wagon, weak but alive, one of them reached out and touched the rancher's sleeve, whispering a single word that meant brother, and his jaw tightened as memories of a burned village and an Apache woman he once loved flashed through his eyes. And without ceremony, he rode away with them toward the mountains, leaving Red Hollow to face a justice it had tried to silence. And the narrator closes by reminding us that history is filled with graves But sometimes, just sometimes, a lone soul rides in and changes the ending. And if you believe stories like this deserve to live on, hit the subscribe button, because every legend shared keeps the truth alive. And every subscription tells us you're riding with us into the next unforgettable tale.